Heartfelt Clubhouse. I am your host, BBC, and I am joined here today in colorful Colorado with Amanda. Amanda, if you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us what you do.
Yeah, I run a group practice, counseling practice, Original Path Counseling. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I've been doing this for about 12 years. Our practice specializes in a lot of things now because we have a lot of clinicians and honestly an incredible team. I feel super lucky. But we specialize in trauma. We see kids as low as like 4 years old all the way up to elderly. So our practice covers quite a large range now. And my experience has ranged obviously over the years with a lot of different training, but my expertise has been in severe anxiety, severe depression, and suicidal ideation. In teens and young adults is primarily the specialty.
Gotcha. So with that age demographic, teen and young adults, what kind of led you to specialize in that area?
Oh, good question. I didn't go into it specializing in that area. I think when you go to school and you get your graduate degrees and training, you kind of get thrown into a lot of different populations and figure out what you're good at, figure out like what you connect with, what do you really enjoy working with, and just naturally figured out that I'm really good at working with teenagers, really good at working with that population. And even though it is a difficult population to work with, working with suicidal ideation, it also has such a tremendous impact to work with that population. So I really enjoy working with it, and then it kind of stuck over the years, and then got super passionate about it and did a lot of training in it, and happy to speak with nonprofits or anybody to get the message out because it's such a huge issue.
Yeah. No, I mean, with that age demographic, like, there's so many life transitions that they're going through. Like, there's so many different points where they could kind of have those traumas or, you know, new emotions. Do you notice, like, a hesitation to step into therapy among this age group?
Absolutely. I think it's better over the last years, right? The stigma is starting to go down, which is amazing. The more people talk about it, the more it's becoming normalized. One of the good things about social media is having a platform, people sharing, being vulnerable, talking about mental health, and that it's a normal thing, that people experience depression, people experience anxiety at very, very different levels, that you're not alone if you're going through this. So I think that has transitioned over the years, but there's a difference of acknowledging it and being able to say it even on social media or something, and that vulnerability seems to be easier for people than taking the next step of, okay, but I need to get help, right?
Yes.
So I can talk about it. I can talk about it's okay for me to feel that way. It's okay to be not okay. And I think that's great that we've gotten to that narrative. But the next step of how do I get help, or do I deserve help, or am I at the point a lot of the times where I finally see people coming into counseling is, you know, I have no more hope. I have nothing left, right?
Yes.
And somebody finally gets them in. If it's a teenager, maybe their parent gets them in. Maybe it's too much to a desperate position that they don't really have a choice anymore. But it's nice when they come in before that. But I think the next step, like, the vulnerability is great. The narrative is changing, which is amazing. The stigma is going away with it, which is amazing. But there's still this block. Adults, teenagers alike.
Yeah.
But there's still this block of, if I go get help, something's wrong with me.
So you kind of touched on it, the crisis, like being in a crisis moment, and that's when you step into therapy.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's what I did. I, probably should have gone to therapy a lot sooner than I did, but it took the crisis to really push me to seek help. When do you think, like, what is maybe a telltale sign that you should start stepping into therapy, even if it's, in order to avoid that crisis situation?
Yeah. So teenagers, I think, are one of the hardest ones to gauge for people of, a teenager that is experiencing maybe anxiety or depression. I think suicidal ideation is a very, very clear, still difficult to get in when you're in that point, difficult to talk about, scary to talk about for teenagers. But that's a pretty clear indicator that, like, oh, this is really bad. But a normal, average, everyday teenager is going to experience a lot of the symptoms that look like anxiety, a lot of the symptoms that look like depression, right? So if you're experiencing, isolation, you're having trouble with school, you're having trouble focusing, you're having trouble with friends, right? Maintaining friends or getting friends. You're sad, not really sure where you fit in the world, not really sure like what you want to do with your life. Like those are all normal teenage experiences.
Yeah.
Where the differentiation is of maybe it's time is how long are those feelings lasting?
Okay.
So are those feelings lasting a short period of time, right? Like it kind of comes and goes, but in general, I can experience the day. I can feel good. I can feel joy. Or am I walking around and wearing kind of this mask, right? This at school, I can be happy. At school, I can enjoy stuff. I can be around friends, and I go home and sitting with myself and sitting with my own thoughts. I don't want to be there. I don't want to experience it. I don't want to feel it. I don't want to be alone. That's a pretty good indicator of it's time to talk to somebody else. It's time to get a professional to try and help.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. And I think, what you just touched on, a lot of people are hearing that and it's clicking that, maybe I should get help, or people looking back like, okay, that's a time when I should have probably gotten help.
But it's never too late. Like saying that
Yes.
it's not too late. So if you get into crisis mode, if you're already experiencing suicidal ideation, you're listening or watching this and you're like, okay, I do all those things. Like, do I need to go get help? The answer is yes. Like all of us could get help in some way, shape, or form. You don't need to be in crisis to get help. You don't need to think I have something wrong with me by getting help, right? If you look at life and maybe you have a problem or a challenge that you need to solve and I could process it, I could let it go. Like I know I'm capable of it. It might take me 3 or 6 months to do it.
Yeah.
Why would you not go get help and have you get through that or let that go in a month?
Yeah.
Right? Why would you not expedite it if just because you can do it on your own doesn't mean that you need to? And I think that's a big thing for people is reaching out for help is scary. It's difficult, but just because you can do it on your own doesn't mean that that's what you need to do. And if you're in that desperate place, in that crisis place, it's not too late.
Yeah.
To reach out for help.
Yeah, and I think one thing that, maybe stops people from doing that is obviously the stigma around it, and they're perceiving it as, I'm a burden asking for help. When the reality is, it's a privilege to help someone. Like it provides deeper relationships, and we've all felt these feelings that can be really tough. So it really is not a burden in any type of way.
I feel super, super lucky and privileged to do my job.
Yeah.
I have a very unique job, right? I get to be in other people's worlds. When I form a relationship, therapeutic relationship with my client, I know anything and everything about this person. When you have a really, really good relationship with your therapist, I know the good, the bad, the ugly, the embarrassing, the everyday stuff. I am the therapist, which is not every therapist, but I'm the therapist that's like getting memes from my clients or sending memes about therapy.
She's the cool therapist.
Because it's just everyday life, and everyday life is hard. And I think that's where people get like, well, my stuff is not bad enough, right?
Right.
On paper, my life is great, right? Like I have loving parents, maybe you don't, right? Like there's lots of factors that go into it, but maybe you have loving parents, maybe you have a good, a good life, a great time with school, maybe you have friends, maybe you get good grades, maybe you have all that, but your internal dialogue is still like, I'm not enough, I'm failing, like you're still not okay with yourself. And I think that's a big factor of it's time to get help. It's time to reach out, and forming a relationship with a therapist makes a huge difference for that. You're not alone. You're not a burden. I'm super lucky that I definitely don't look at it as a burden. I do this job because I love it. Right?
Yeah. So we at the Heartfelt Club, we always, when we receive DMs asking for support, one thing we hear a lot is, I didn't like my therapist.
Yep.
Did not enjoy it. Never doing therapy again. What does finding the right fit as a therapist look like? Or, how do you know you're in a safe space with your therapist?
Yeah. On paper, you want to look for what are you personally going through, right? If you are struggling with depression, you're struggling with suicidal ideation, you want to see a therapist that is what they work with. That's the ideal. Right. If you're struggling with an eating disorder, right? You want to see a therapist that specializes in that particular thing. Saying that, though, the number one thing that makes a difference for your therapist is your relationship with them. Is, can you trust them? Do you feel like you can share something with them? Do you feel like it is a safe, non-judgmental space? And for that, I say trust your instincts.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the therapist for everybody, right? Like my specialty, my method of therapy, I'm a very realistic therapist. I'm going to encourage you sometimes. I'm going to be like, why are you doing that? Other times, like, this is not good. That works for some people, it doesn't work for other people. So the biggest thing is find a therapist that you feel like you can be vulnerable with, that you feel like you can trust. So much of my work, especially working with suicidal population, is built off of trust. I trust what you're telling me is truthful, and you trust me. You trust my skill set. You trust what I'm telling you. And so if you go into therapy and you try different therapists, set up like 5 different consults, right? Find who you feel the most comfortable with. And it is so hard when you go into a session and that's not the right fit for you to not get discouraged and want to go like back and try somebody else. It's exhausting. Therapy is exhausting, right?
Yeah.
But it's worth it. It's worth it. Most of the people that come into therapy, especially if they're teenagers, like maybe their parent is like, you need to go, or they're finally in a great space that like, they're like, I think I need a counselor, which is the best thing to do, is to talk to your parents or talk to somebody, say, I think I need help. They come in and they're like, therapy's so hard. This is so difficult. Like, I don't know about this. I don't know if I want to share all my embarrassing, like the judgment, the worry about judgment, even from a therapist of what are they going to think about me, right? If I'm sharing these inner thoughts that are depressing and difficult. But if you can build that relationship and you can build that trust, by most of the time, like the people on my caseload, they came on when they were teenagers and then they don't leave. Which is great. And it's not because they didn't hit their goal. It's not because they didn't achieve what they initially came in for, but they come in and out of therapy. I might not see them for 5 years and then something comes up and then they're like, oh my gosh, Amanda, I have to tell you this. I need some help. Absolutely, right? They see the benefit of therapy over time, that it's worth it. It doesn't mean you have to be in it all the time, but having an outside, objective, non-judgmental person that has your back and has your back in a different way than a friend. A friend's going to be like, I got you no matter what, right? A really good friend. A really good therapist is going to be like, I got you, and I'm going to challenge you.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think one thing to note is, like, when you're stepping into therapy, you are putting yourself first.
Yes.
So don't let that stop at, okay, I don't want to hurt this therapist's feelings, and stay. You have to put yourself first. If it's not a good fit, the therapist will respect that, and you can find, your perfect match, if you will.
And if the therapist doesn't respect it, that's not who you should be with.
Perfect
right?
sign.
Exactly. If you're so worried about what your therapist is going to think or feel, that's probably not like the best fit for you. Finding the right fit, finding somebody that you can trust, finding somebody that you can share everything with is the number one thing. The relationship with your therapist is what makes the biggest difference. Now you have to trust the training with the therapist. The therapist needs to be trained in whatever challenge that you're going through, but the biggest factor for me and what I see works and why it's been successful is them being able to trust the process, trust me.
Awesome. I totally agree with everything you said. One thing that I think might be interesting for the audience, after your first session, I think a lot of people assume you're fixed. You're gonna have a breakthrough every session. And that's not the case. So what should the first session kind of feel like? How do you know you're feeling good?
One, I think trust your instincts, right? If you are in a space, it is normal to feel super nervous. It is normal to not trust your therapist in the first session by any means, right? That takes time to build that trusting relationship. But if you're at the end of a first session, you want to feel like this person can help me. This person, I feel like I could trust this person at some point. Not that you trust them right this second, but I feel like I could trust them. I feel like they could help me. If you don't feel that by the end of the first session, then it means maybe that's not the right person for you. Having realistic expectations is the other thing, is you're not going to feel like, oh, this is so great, right? Therapy is hard. The first session is difficult. Most of the first few months is really difficult. You're getting into a lot of difficult conversations and building this new relationship. But you do want to trust your instincts. You do want to know if this person is good for you or not. And if you don't walk out of there feeling like they could help you, then that is your indicator that maybe I need to find somebody else. It's not that they gave you all the answers. It's not they told you exactly what is going to happen. It's not even that you hold hope for yourself. So a lot of people that come in and they're suicidal, they don't know what next year looks like. They can't picture what their life would look like. They can't imagine not feeling the way that they feel. That's okay, right? That's okay to feel that way. That's okay to walk into a space. You're not going to feel like, oh my gosh, I feel so much hope after the first session.
Yeah.
But you can feel like, I'm going to give this person some time. I'm going to give this therapist some time. I think this therapist could do something to help me. If you get that piece, then you're in the right place.
Yeah. For me, when I like stepped into therapy, it was always, okay, I'm not gonna cry this session. And then they'd be like, how are you really? And I'd be like, well, and start sobbing. But after each session, it was like a tiny weight got lifted slowly. So it is a journey, and I think that's important to note. Now, you touched on this a little bit before. I feel like a lot of people, especially like maybe the parents of adolescents who are struggling, they think that there's a solid checklist. Like, okay, you're failing class, you have no friends, and I don't know. This is how I know you're depressed.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it can be hard for those parents to kind of acknowledge that it can look different for everyone, and you don't have to fit this mold to want to step into therapy or to need that therapy. Is that something you've experienced in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people have an idea of what their life should look like, right?
Yeah.
Because on paper my life looks this way, because I'm doing well in school, I'm getting good grades, I have friends, means I should not be depressed. Everybody experiences depression in different levels throughout their life. It is normal to experience that. Maybe not at a clinical level, although that is normal as well. Not everybody experiences it to that level, but it is normal to go through periods of depression. It is normal to go through periods of anxiety. And oftentimes the outside world, so your parents, your friends, don't see what that internal dialogue looks like. They don't see the challenges that you're going through, and that could be for a lot of reasons. It's really, really difficult to be vulnerable. Yeah. And the other factor that I see a lot in teenagers especially, but in general population, is that I don't know why, right? Yeah. That I should feel like I do have friends. I do have these things. I do have a good life. I have a good wife, or I have a good family, or whatever. Why do I feel this way, right? Like that factor of I don't understand it. And so because I don't understand it, it's not normal, and nobody else is going to understand it. Right. And that's a very, very lonely place to be. And just having these conversations and getting it out to people lets them know, like, you are not alone in that. You don't need to know why. There's a lot of reasons that people can have depression, even if it's not the checklist, even if it's not, well, all these things look fine. Why do I still feel this way? There's genetic components to depression for sure. Yeah. There's a lot of environmental factors that go into depression. So I think knowing you're not alone if you feel that way. You're not alone. There's the outward signs, right? But unfortunately, we see even in media and even in celebrities at this point, we see people passing away from suicide, and on the outside, they weren't the person that you would expect, right? Everybody is saying, oh my gosh, they were always such a joy to be around. They were so amazing. I had no idea that they were feeling this way. And so these conversations, and if you're listening to this, you're watching this, it is super important to share with somebody that you are struggling. Yeah. Every person on this planet, we are human. We are not going to be perfect. We have our own internal struggles. We have our own internal securities. That's super normal. Don't minimize them. Don't feel like you're alone, right, in feeling that way. Yeah, definitely. And I think, as a society, we would obviously rather rally and support you than ever have to mourn someone who's struggling. Yeah, I think one of the factors that can be a good check for yourself is if a friend was going through this, right? Mm-hmm. If this was your best friend feeling the way that you feel right now, saying the things to themselves that you're saying right now, and they didn't tell you, and they weren't saying something, right? And maybe they finally came to you and said something, how would you respond, right? Yeah. How would you feel like it's a burden, or would you be like, oh my gosh, like, what are you going to tell that person? Yeah. Or you would want to support them. You wouldn't want them to feel that way. And even though maybe you don't feel worthy of that, put that into perspective for yourself, that if this is your friend, then you would want them to say something.
Yeah.
You would want to be there for them, and that's what your friends feel, that's what your family feels, even if they're not saying it, even if they don't know that this is what you're going through.
Yeah. And I also think it's just, you obviously experienced a different set of stressors, and I experienced different set of stressors. Kids nowadays have so many different platforms that they can kind of start to feel less than or start to compare.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen that a lot in your field, with social media being a huge mental health, in my opinion, like bully at times.
Yeah. Social media has its great points. Connection for people throughout the world, being able to stay connected to the world is amazing. It definitely, being able to have a platform to share your struggles, and not feel alone and have support in that is amazing, but it definitely has its downside. The online bullying is super, super bad. It's so different to have to say something to somebody's face than to type it on a computer or on your phone. That's one aspect. And then just the comparison. What you are seeing on social media is what somebody wants you to see. It is not their real life, right? There are plenty of people that portray, right? They wear the mask. We all do in some respect. They wear the mask, and you're seeing the highlight reel. You are not seeing the I'm sitting alone in my room or in my apartment or in my house or whatever, and I feel terrible about myself. I feel terrible about my life. They're not putting that out on social media. Besides, then you can get into all the filters and Photoshop and 100 million things that are not real life.
Yes.
But it is a totally different ballgame now than it used to be in terms of what teenagers are being raised in. They're being raised in this comparison environment. You could be having an amazing vacation with your family doing a road trip, but then you're looking online and your friends in Paris hanging out, and then you're like, well, my road trip sucks. This sucks, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be something to kind of compare to, and our brain naturally goes to the negative. So we naturally look at what are we missing in life? What is the bad part? And so it is super influential in not a great way to grow up and have this constant comparison in your life. So much so that it is a huge factor in depression and anxiety. That's been proven at this point, that if you are spending, adults, teenagers, you're spending more than an hour or two a day on social media, and the average teenager spends about 6 hours a day, they are 60% more likely to have anxiety and depression. That is huge. And that is a big factor of why we see it way more now.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a huge statistic that, I never was aware of that. I knew how social media made me feel, and it was kind of one of those things where I did social media detoxes. Yeah. Is that something you kind of employ or implore in your therapies?
I think it's great, ideally. Realistically, do some people want to do it? Yeah. No. I'm much more of a what's going to work for you, right? Some people that definitely works for them of get rid of all of it and get off of it. And I think realistically, yes, disconnecting and getting off of technology and being able to participate in your life in a real way makes a huge difference. It definitely helps our mental health. To a lot of people, that seems incredibly overwhelming. I don't, especially teenagers, that is a huge way of communication. That's a huge thing of if you're not knowing what's going on, if you didn't watch what, oh my gosh, did you see that person's TikTok or that person's Snapchat? You feel very, very out of the loop. Yeah. So it's more about balance. It's more about what is this giving you? How is this helpful? And what point does it become detrimental? At what point is it not great for you? And if you're doing it to that extent or that much in a day, we know it's not good for you, right? You don't have to cut it out. It's helpful, but you don't have to cut it out. But you do need to keep in mind, I probably shouldn't be living my life on my phone. We're all guilty of that, but I probably shouldn't be living my life on my phone. I probably should be participating in life a little bit more. And I need to know that what I'm watching is what somebody wants me to see. It is not the full picture.
As a guardian of maybe these adolescents, is that a conversation that you would have with them of how to create a safe space for adolescents to fully express themselves or ask, I think maybe I want to step into therapy?
Yeah, I think that's difficult to ask, but that is something I encourage teenagers. I encourage, if you're an adult and you have the capability of looking and finding a therapist, absolutely. Get out there, start looking, get into therapy. If you're a teenager and not quite sure what to do, I think talking to somebody that's trusted in your family, or an adult friend of some sort that's just saying, you don't have to share everything. You don't have to share all of your deepest, darkest, secrets to that person, but you can share. I think it would be helpful for me to see a counselor at the very, very minimum. I encourage people to go out and at least share that with some adult so that they can get the help that they need. And then adults are great, but a lot of people don't know, right?
100%.
I mean, as a parent, a lot of parents don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to help you, and that's okay. They're doing their best. So getting somebody who's trained in it, who knows how to help you, is a huge difference.
Yeah, and it's always super nice to have that third party where, they don't have a vision of you that, you're worried could be altered.
Right.
It's just they're taking you as you are, and you really get to 100% express yourself in that safe space. So with that being said, I think now is a great time to do our calls to action.
I would say my call to action is for twofold, right? If you are listening to this and you identified with some of these symptoms, you feel like, my life is imperfect, because none of ours are, and I probably could get help, and I want to see a counselor. Maybe that would be something that could be beneficial to me. Tell somebody. Tell your friend. If you're younger, tell an adult of some sort, a trusted adult, to say, hey, can you help me find a counselor? I think it would be helpful. You don't have to get into everything. You don't have to share everything if you don't feel comfortable. You don't know how to do that. But I encourage you to talk to somebody, to ask for help. If you are an adult, you're a parent, a friend that is struggling, encourage them to get help. Say something. And if you are a parent of any age, kid, if you have a grown adult kids, if you have little ones, ask your kid today, what is something that is challenging for you? What is something that is having you feel sad? It's uncomfortable, but it is unbelievably necessary to give the space for your kids, to give the space for your friends to answer that question and be direct about that question. They don't have to be okay. You can feel sad about things, but ask the question, give space for somebody to share.
Awesome. My call to action is going to be a little more centered around social media. So just to make it easy for adolescents who are going to be consuming different social media platforms, go follow one mental health account on Instagram or TikTok that makes you feel good. Because really whatever you consume, it is affecting you. So if you're always looking at things that you can compare yourself to, you're going to kind of embody that a little bit more than you should. So find some feel-good things that can really start to grow your mental health wellness. And then, again, if you are struggling, there are safe spaces to reach out. And it can be scary, but it can be as simple as texting your best friend, hey, I actually really need to talk to you about something that I'm struggling with. Or going to your mom and being like, I really need a hug right now. And then they're going to dig in because they really do want to support you. So that's my call to action for today.
I think that's a great point. I think, like I said, social media isn't all bad, right? It's not all negative, but what you are surrounding yourself with, what you are following makes a huge difference. So follow the inspirational accounts, follow the mental health accounts that you understand a little bit more about what you're going through. You don't feel as alone in what you're going through, and then take the next step to get help.
Yes. Awesome. And is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we kind of close out?
I think just the reality that life is hard. It's not going to be great all the time, and therapy is not to get rid of all the negativity. That's not what it's for. It's not to say, I'm never going to feel depressed. I'm never going to feel anxious. Therapy is going to kind of get rid of all of that. No, it's to know life is difficult. Life is challenging.
Yeah.
And that is normal. To have insecurities is normal. The goal of therapy is to help you manage all of that.
Yes.
It's so that you don't get so low, so you don't get to the crisis mode, that you can appreciate and enjoy the good parts of life and make space for the difficult parts and hold those together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us in the Heartfelt Clubhouse.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, that is a wrap for today, but don't forget to go out there and be more heartfelt.
As always, if you or someone you know is in crisis, to speak with someone immediately, contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-2855. That's 1-800-273-TALK. Contact Lifeline Crisis Chat or contact the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, at 1-800-950-6264, or text NAMI, NAMI, to 741741. Thank you, and don't forget to be more heartfelt.